Hello.
Welcome to the Knitting a Good Yarn podcast. My name's Jackie.
I'm Carmen.
And this is another knitting podcast. What episode is this, Carmen?
Well, I was laughing at this because I don't know if you're actually going to feel that this is worthy of episode 1 even yet, because I think this is this extra episode because it's Zoom, which people would not be doing, but I'm in England right now and we've got the KAL coming up and we wanted to just do some extra little bits of, get some information out there about that. So it's supposed to be a short one. So then I'm like, what is this? Is this like 0.75? Like what's happening? When are we actually going to do episode 1? I don't know.
What I was thinking, I was like, is this episode 0.75 or is it episode 1? And I was, so if this is your first time tuning in with us, welcome. And if you've been with us since episode 0.5, welcome back. We're so happy that you've decided to join us in this little corner of the internet. What I think we are going to endeavor to do today is share some finished objects and some whips.
Yep.
And to talk a little bit about the Inspired by Ellen KAL and sort of where we are with that, and to also take the opportunity to answer some questions that have sort of come up around working with Nutiden Yarn and unspun yarn and those kinds of things. That's our plan. But to answer this question, what episode number is it? I kind of feel like every single one of our episodes might be like this in the sense that our only process is we don't have a process, but it's just a constant
with me on the team. I think that's probably likely going to be the case, that we're probably not going to be the most, what would I say about, not structured, but yeah, we're kind of flowing along with things. So it might not be always the, finished objects, then whips, then acquisitions. So I think it's great to call it episode 1, but I leave it to you, Jackie, whatever you like.
I think episode 1 makes it feel like we're embracing our process, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay. Deal. 10 minutes of us figuring out what number our episode is.
You're still here. Thank you for sticking around. So, Carmen, what are you wearing?
So I am wearing, this was a test knit I did. This is the Fields of Gold sweater by Bella from 100 Acre Wool, I think.
Show notes in the description box.
Oh God, always. I really even tried to prep, but yeah, no. So this is Nutiden. This is in the colorway Fleeceline, which is a kind of you can see like a natural white, but then it has all these little flecks of black in it, which gives it a lot more dimension, I think, than just white, which I thought just really works so nicely with all of the different details. I don't know, how is that coming up? Is it very clear?
Looks so good to me.
Good. And this, I could go on, and I've got my Ravelry. Oh, it's not even fully updated yet. Oh, I've got some pictures on it, and I'll put more, but just the details like that Bella did. I don't know if you can really see this, but we actually did short rows in the arms to make this like hem, or I don't know if it's not really coming out, but it kind of angles, which is cool. Like just lots of details with almost like sweetheart neckline. And this was a beautiful knit to do, interesting, constantly changing, but not overwhelming. I loved it.
I love that neckline so much. Like when I saw it come out, I thought to myself, this is a sweater that with a neckline that I 100% have no idea how it's happening. And I 100% want to have it. And I can't wait to, when you come back to Ontario for our like regularly scheduled episode next month, in which I get to try it on.
Yes, exactly. And I actually just love, because for those of you who are new with us and haven't seen us last time, Jackie thinks a lot with her knits. I just impulsively, maybe not impulsively, but impulsively, just go along with what just feels like, hey, yes. So I saw this, I'm like, I've got to knit it. But I didn't even think about the fact that this would be a very interesting construction, but I should have, because it's completely different. Like, how in the world would a normal construction do this? But so then Jackie was like, oh, I'm so excited to find out how this happened. And I'm like, oh, right. It's going to be different, isn't it? And it was. And it was very exciting and fun.
Are you happy with it? Are
So
you happy with how it turned out? Yeah.
I'm so happy, and I'm happy that England is finally decided to cool off a little bit. It's still a bit too hot, in my opinion, but we were getting, it was a day of 38 and 39, so there was no sweaters happening. I was just been in tank tops and shorts. So very happy to be in this little lovely. Oh, and the back has kind of the same detailing. So there. And
oh, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I love how instinctive it is for you in terms of like deciding what you want to knit and casting things on. It's such an instinctive process for you. Did you know what color you were going to do when you first started this? Or tell me a little bit about the story of how you arrived at this particular knit in this particular colorway.
I love it. Thank you. Because of course I would have just jumped right ahead on to our next thing. So this was an interesting situation because actually my first colorway was tall bark, which is like a, it looks like bark, like pine bark, with all these different flecks in it. It's such a beautiful color. But as I was knitting it, I realized that the details, it was almost, even though it doesn't have a lot of variation, it was enough that it was kind of getting lost a little bit, that I wasn't really being able to see this amazing work here. So I actually knit, I would say to maybe here. Like it wasn't, I hadn't quite split the sleeves, but I knit quite a lot. And I was like, this is not it. And as I was doing it, Fleeceline was just sitting on the counter, and it was just like on my shelf, and it was just saying, I think you need to use me. And I'm like, I know I do. But I tried. I was like, but I've done all this work and it's hard to like stop. But I just knew it. So I got to that point and I said, you know what? I'm starting over again, and just started. But honestly, I got back to that space in like 2 days, even though it was so much knit. It goes pretty fast for it. So anyway, yeah.
So you have that double, right, Carmen?
Yes.
Yes. Double. Do you remember what needle size you used? I think you used 7s.
Did I? Maybe. I'll have that updated eventually. Shoot. No, what did I use?
Check the description box below if you want to know what Carmen used.
Yes, but probably not for a little bit, because I realized, so I brought this with me. I finished it right before I left. Like literally I took pictures on the day I was flying out. Like I think we left half an hour after I took pictures. It had like just dried, and I like went, got pictures and left. And I was like, well, I'll bring it to England and I'll do the rest of it here. Not thinking that I didn't bring a scale or anything with me. So I can't even tell you how much. I have to wait till I get home to do all of my Ravelry updating with how much it is. But I don't think it was, I think it was probably around 300.
In terms of how many plates you use, you think it's somewhere close?
Yeah, I think about 3, I'm guessing. It could be a little bit, yeah, somewhere around there. And I don't even remember the size. Size 2?
We'll find it. We'll find it. We'll include it in the show notes, because we had a conversation about this. And so if I say scroll back fast, like far enough in our messages, this information is going to be findable. So we'll find it. And people can start to plan maybe if that's something that is speaking to you that you want to knit.
Yes, highly. And Ellen, who inspired our Cal, she made an absolutely gorgeous version of this sweater as well. We happened to be in the same test knit group, and didn't even know this, or I didn't know this. So she did it in this gorgeous brown, and and then all the other testers, like I haven't seen one that didn't look amazing. So it's like, if this is a sweater, I would say that everybody needs to knit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to knit it, and I think I'm gonna have to knit it in the exact same colorway, because it is so good.
I mean, Fleeceline saying you gotta do it. Like it really is the most versatile. Like who couldn't use a white sweater? But for me, actually, we've talked about white. I sometimes find that white, like the natural white, can be a bit too creamy for me. So this, like fleeceline, having the little bit of black in it, I don't know, it just like cools it down a little bit for me and makes it more of a gray. So I love it.
I also feel like it just perfectly matches the backdrop of this beautiful place that you're in right now.
Yeah, it does. I may have to stay here because actually we'll jump ahead, but like everything's just matching. Like the decor, like I'm supposed to stay here, I guess.
You're perfectly color coordinated for your surroundings.
At least while I'm in this phase of this wool. When I want to knit something else, I guess that I get to go home and go to different colors.
So that reminds me of something that I was hoping that we would talk a little bit about on the podcast today, which is how much fun it's been to kind of do this podcast, and how grateful and overwhelmed and excited Carmen and I have been since we put out the first sort of unplanned, unscripted episode, and how many sort of synchronicities and like little connections we've discovered through the podcast, excuse me, in terms of finding out that, you know, many of us knit kind of in our homes on our own. If we're lucky, then we get to have a knitting bestie or we get to connect with other knitters. But this experience of discovering that in our conversations with other people that like they too are knitting with like the same color, or they had the same thought, or they had like the same kind of idea, and how fun that has been. And speaking for myself, Carmen doesn't get back until like almost the end of August, like a week or two before our KAL is set to begin. And when we talked about, you know, when we were going to record our next episode, it was like, oh, we'll record our first episode in the fall and then we'll do one once a month. But it's really been everybody's like enthusiasm and all the conversations that we've been having and how much fun this process has been that led us to be like, today we're going to figure out this Zoom thing and we're going to give you guys an episode. So,
and the response, as you're saying, has just been like so encouraging. Just the words, I've like, we're both trying to go through the comments. We can't always do them every day, obviously. Actually, I was going to do them today, but then I hurt my fingers, so I can't actually like type right now. Luckily, I can still knit, but I can't type. But I'm trying to like portray when I'm responding just how meaningful it is to hear people's comments, to hear that they are having a great time, like just enjoying being with us. Like it feels like it's exactly what we were hoping for, you know, just like connecting with others, sharing our joy, and hoping that there are other people that actually have the same kind of feel as we do and can enjoy this along with us.
Yeah. So thank you for being here.
Yeah.
What do we want to talk about now? What did we say?
Well, if I can say, I mean, I've done my beautiful sweater, but like, what is happening here? What is happening with this gorgeousness?
So this is the Magnolia Bloom by Nutiden, and it is also knit in Nutiden in the color Pupilin. And I put it on today because actually the reason why we're recording right now is right next to Carmen on the couch in terms of this beautiful swatch. Oh my God, there's 2 sleeves. This beautiful swatch that she had knit for the Inspired by Ellen KAL. And so I thought it was appropriate today that I put on this sweater that I've knit in one of the colors that you've used there. So this sweater I knit using double strands and using the largest needle size I've ever used to knit Nutiden. So this sweater was knit off gauge to the pattern, but using a 6.5 millimeter needle.
Okay.
And so
what size is that in US? Is that like
10.5 maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. 10.5. And it has created the most wonderfully airy fabric. Gorgeous. That although in Ontario it is 30 plus degrees Celsius, and of course I'm indoors and I do have central air, this is actually something that I consider part of my sort of summer wardrobe.
Wow.
Because it's so light. I knit it kind of propped with like a high-low hem,
oh.
little bell. And because there's this open lace, it's actually kind of the perfect thing to wear in a cool evening because you kind of get the breeze through. But on like a windy day when I'm out near the water and, you know, that cooler breeze is coming off the lake, this is something that I can throw on. And it's so light. So this whole sweater, I think the like measured bust size after blocking comes out somewhere between 39 or 40 inches. I don't know what that is in centimeters. 220 grams.
Oh my God. Right? Like, this is Nutiden magic. Like, how in the world, like, again, we were talking the last time, if this was like, this is 220 grams. So we're talking just over 2 skeins, really, if you're knitting, well, no. Yeah, like imagine this would be almost worse. Well, what would it be like worse? Because it's knitted, it's knit.
So the pattern calls for bulky. Like
Bulky.
it's I think the gauge is something like 12 stitches per 4 centimeters in turn. And I knitted off gauge. I did knit off gauge. All the information is in the Ravelry, but I think I ended up going 2 sizes up in order to adjust for gauge. And it did not take that much yarn.
Yeah, like you couldn't do this with bulky, like you could not do this with 2 skeins of bulky. There's just no way. Like that would take you like, you know, just the top part maybe, right? So it's just incredible.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, I think, the experience of sort of being able to plan, but not really being able to plan when it comes to Nutiden, in the sense that what I love about this particular yarn, and the only other unspun that I've actually knit with is Plotulopi, and so we'll try and talk about that. We'll definitely try and bring some samples of things that I've made in Plotulopi. But what I would say about unspun yarn is that how it feels and looks in the skein and how it behaves after it's been knit and blocked is so incredibly different. And I think both Plotulopi and Nutiden are unspun yarns where you kind of have the plates and then you knit it up at, you know, from anywhere. For me, I've knit US 1 all the way up to US 10.5 with 1 or 2 strands. And it's kind of like the yarn tells you what fabric it wants to make, right? Yes. Rather than sort of, let's say, spun wools or wools that have multiple plies or have a twist, I feel like there is less flexibility in terms of if you went and got any kind of twisted or spun yarn, that it's gonna tell you, okay, you have this many options in terms of fabric. Yes. And whilst with unspun, there is some variation, I feel like you can decide how you want to work with it, right? The only thing I would say in terms of uncertainty is the fact that it becomes a little bit of this unknown of like how much you're going to end up using, you know, how much you need. But one of the questions that we'd gotten since the last episode around working with Nutiden yarn is like, how much do I need to buy if I want a sweater? How much do I need to buy if I want to knit an accessory? And the answer to that question is kind of dependent on, you know, how you want to work with it. Do you want to work with it if it's single? Do you want single stranded? Do you want to work with it double stranded? Like what gauge do you want to work at? And that sort of changes things. But generally speaking, what I would say is most of my sweaters that are knit double stranded, and typically I'm going to knit something with a finished bust size of like somewhere between 37 and 42. Most of my sweaters, this is an anomaly, most of my sweaters, I'm somewhere between 300 and 400 grams.
Yeah, I would say mine's, about the same. Maybe about 300. Yeah, depending on the sweater and how big it is, like how long, and And then of course it goes even less, like if you're doing single, it's crazy. Like, I think, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, I have it upstairs, but I'll have to, because I bring the sweater everywhere. But this is, it's a turtleneck sweater, and like, so full sleeves, goes all the way down regular length. Beautiful sweater, like raglan, by Frida Franzen, but I think she goes by Frida Oskap online, and we will put it in the description. I will find that. But that one was 149 grams.
Yeah.
Like, you almost need to like go and find something in your house that's 149 grams, like 150 grams, because it's shocking. Like, it just feels, it's light as air. And like, you can almost do it like with a skein and a bit, because also with Nutiden, what they're so generous in what they give. So when you buy even 100 grams, like a plate, it's as 100 grams, but usually it's 115, you know, like, I mean, they're just so generous with what they give. So yeah.
I think Carolyn, so a lot of the questions that we got about Nutiden Yarn, we're going to answer sort of as we go in further episodes of the podcast, but actually really good resources to actually go to the Honor Air website, which we'll link below. And Carolyn has answered a lot of the questions. And so it's kind of nice to get her perspective, because she's the maker of the yarn, and her recommendations. And typically her recommendations around sweater quantities is 500 grams for a sweater and 300 grams if you're wanting to sort of knit a shawl. But we'll, as we go along, share the like weights and amounts of the various things that we show along with our sizing, so that you can get a sense of, okay, how much might I want to purchase if you've been inspired to work with the yarn.
And before we move on, just because I know we did get asked about the names, that I'm not the best at being very clear about the names, and we will always have it in the show notes, but that sweater, which I haven't shown and will show next time, but it is called the Scabatrum sweater. It's a tall, like a turtleneck.
The single stranded sweater that weighed less than 200 grams.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a really interesting process of figuring out what feels good in your hands, right? Like what do you enjoy knitting? Especially given that it is the middle of summer. You and I are clothed in Nutiden, and and I do sometimes chuckle at myself, because I have yet to get into sort of the summer knitting. I've just not done a summer knit yet. And I'm like perfectly happy working on, worsted, bulky weight projects in the middle of the summer, mostly because I knit almost exclusively, but not completely exclusively, with Nutiden yarn. And so it's something, because it's so lofty and airy, I don't feel like I'm carrying an entire sheep in my lap. That being said, I will say that I recently finished a project that is knitted mohair. I haven't brought it today because I really want to be able to show the colors, and Zoom does this thing in which colors don't come out quite as right. It's a mohair shawl, and I found it to be less summer friendly. And I know mohair is like not actually a summer fabric.
Yeah.
But it's knit single-stranded mohair. And then I have a number of single-stranded Nutiden shawls, and I am more temperature regulated working with a single strand of Nutiden, wearing a single-stranded shawl, than mohair, which I knit a mohair shawl thinking like, oh, this is going to be my summer knit because it's light and it's tiny and it was easy to throw places. And yeah, so it's really, I just think it's really interesting to explore different fabrics. I try once a year to explore a different medium, but I love the feeling of Nutiden running through my hands. And so that's why I work with it. And in the summer, I'm most likely working with it single-stranded.
Me too.
So what are you working on, Carmen?
So, well, speaking of our KAL, I guess we should talk a little bit about that. So this I have started, but that doesn't mean I was supposed to start. Okay. So if you're out there going, oh my God, like I thought we were waiting until September, we are supposed to. But I was, first of all, just dying to just start doing something. So I was like, well, I need to pick the colors. I mean, need to do that. So I need to do swatches, and I'm a lazy, there's something, I just hate swatches. I just do. And I love Annalie from Evil Myths. She's my favorite because she says, swatching, don't even worry about it. Just like go. And I'm like, yes, Annalie. Okay, I love it. But I did feel in this one I wanted to swatch because I'm actually going to try to do a sweater by myself. Like not, I know, me, right?
Guys,
Gonna do it.
This is the power of community because we put out this episode and we received so many messages. If you like read the comments from our last episode, if you read the comment on Carmen's comments on Carmen's Instagram, like there was just this huge influx of like ideas and people offering like tips and tricks, such that suddenly something that seems, daunting or scary just seems not so scary anymore, because we all find our way to be in the craft. And so I'm so excited that you've like decided to take the leap and say like, I'm gonna figure this out on my own.
Me too. I mean, it's not done yet, but I always am like, the community is here for me. And I'm like, I know that if I cannot somehow join, like I can make a sleeve, I can make another sleeve, I can make a body, I can do these things. That's okay. I'm just going in the round. These things are doable. How it's all going to join together, it might be amazingly easy. It might be hard, but I have people to help me if it's hard. So that's kind of where I was going with. And I did want to say, right before I left on the plane, like right before I was about to go, this arrived in the mail. That's looking, is it backwards or does it flip it?
I don't know.
Okay, well, anyway, it's
Episode
called Knitting.
0.75.
Yeah, there you go. Although, come on, Jackie, in like 10, we're still gonna be doing the same thing. But Knitting in the Nordic Tradition by Vibeke Lind, I think is how you pronounce it. This is the book that Ellen, I think, I don't know if it's the book that Ellen used or it's a different version of it, but this is what she used. Like, there's the sweater right there. So
sweater that inspired her sweater, right?
Exactly. Now she did it as a raglan. You can see here that this one is I think it's probably steeped, like done in the round and then steeped and then arms added. I'm not sure how they,
I think you're right.
I don't think they would do it back and forth. But so I got this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm going to read this. I'm reading it on the plane and I'm fine. I'm like, I'm going through and there are all these patterns and they're talking about these different patterns. And I'm like, I can't wait to get to the patterns at the end. Like, oh yes, I want to knit this. I want to knit this. And I just keep going and I keep flipping and I'm like, well, when are we going to get to the patterns? Like what's going on? And no, you just keep going. They just talk about like, here's the motif. Here's how to make a sweater. Go do it.
There's no pattern. Like,
no, there's some kind of guidance. Like there's a lot of guidance, but no pattern. And yet, as I'm reading it, I'm like, I think I can do this. And I don't know how. It convinced me because it didn't tell me how to do stuff, but it just made me feel like, hey, actually, I think I could do this. So this, got it on Amazon. I think it was like $20 or something like that. And this is just very inspiring. And it has all of these different motifs and things in it and the history. And it talks about wool. Like this is actually a really great knitting book, to be honest. Surprisingly, not just for the one pattern. It's just excellent.
I think that's also one of the things that I'm so excited about in terms of the KAL and also all the inspiration that it's generated, at least like for me and my knitting, is that people have all of these amazing ideas and all of these iterations of how they're going to use it. So for those of you who haven't heard about the Inspired by Ellen KAL, let me do a mini recap.
Yeah, probably get it started with that.
What the watch episode 0.5, or I'll do my best to talk a little bit about it. So the knit along begins September 1st. officially begins September 1st. And when we say officially, what that actually means is that our plan is that we're going to have a little bit of a cast-on party on September 1st virtually, for people to have the opportunity to meet each other and sort of talk about the various different things that they're planning to do with a particular motif. Carmen, can you hold up the sweater again? Do you have the picture? Or yeah, hold up your swatch. Ask you to do 4 things at one time. Okay.
I'll do it. I'll do it all.
So there is this motif that you can see that looks like herringbone, and there's a beautiful, what looks to me like a peacock eye at the bottom. So there's a chart that is available in the book that Carmen showed. It's also available free on the FOs website. And in order to participate in the KAL, within the next 5 months, starting September 1st, all you have to do is knit something that uses all of or part of that motif, whatever you want: sweater, hat, mitten,
Mittens.
cowl, and maybe.
Oh, yes. Look at that. Beautiful. Beautiful.
And I've been so excited because we've heard from people about the different ways that they're going to use the motif, and the different ways in which they're going to like figure out how to use the motif. And so whether you are a like beginning colorwork knitter, you've never done colorwork before, or you're somebody who's incredibly prolific and has accumulated a lot of knitting techniques and skills, our hope is that there's room, if you feel so inspired, to join us.
Yes.
Because I knit this, so this sock I knit entirely because of you guys. So Carmen can attest to the fact that we put out the episode and started hearing from so many of you, and that I went into a bit of a frenzy for like 3 days. I dreamed it like 50 different things. And I, like Carmen, just couldn't wait. So I am planning on knitting the sweater. I actually am now completely confused about what construction I'm going to do because there are so many great ideas. But I just needed to do something. And I have a complicated relationship with swatching because, as you will figure out, Carmen has a gift for colors. I have a gift for thinking about colors, putting colors together, and then realizing that it looks nothing like how it looked in my dream knitting. But when I swatch, I don't want to swatch a giant swatch. And so I swatch these teeny tiny swatches that don't actually end up working out in terms of being accurate for sizing. So I was like, hey, what am I going to do? I want to try a particular color combination that's completely out of my comfort zone, but I adore and love. And so what am I going to do? I can do a sock. So, and I'm very, very new to sock knitting. I've only knit 3 socks in my entire knitting career, and I knit them all out of the same pattern. And so the pattern is the basic sock with the integrated heel by Albina, in combination with a sock recipe, which is by Annalie, who goes by Miss Evil Knits, called the Kura sock. And we'll include all the information on how it is that you can get access to that sock recipe. But I thought, let me just make this easy.
Yeah.
And knit with this color combination, which was inspired by Carmen, which she showed on the last episode. We showed on the last episode. And I can just give the motif a try up here.
Yes, beautiful.
So this sock is actually a little bit of an experiment for me in terms of how I'm going to knit the sweater, because what I've learned about my knitting process is that if I don't enjoy doing it, I'm never going to finish it.
Yes.
And I feel like there have been projects in my life in which I was inspired by somebody else who knit it. that I've like tried to chug my way through because I want the finished object. I don't have the will for that. I never arrive there. I end up with a whip that I feel badly sort of ripping out, sometimes rip out, sometimes goes to, you know, that basket in the closet that I just like may
Yeah.
never take out again.
Mm.
But the thing that I could not figure out is, do I want to do a whole colorwork sweater? And if I'm going to do a whole colorwork sweater, what is going to be an enjoyable gauge, an enjoyable needle size for me to be working an entire sweater? And so this sock actually helped me to figure that out. So the colorwork chart does not include increases, right? It's 12 stitches across.
Yes.
And I am not a designer and therefore cannot figure out, if I wanted to put this in a sock, how am I going to make that work? Because I don't know about you, but my my lower leg is not equal circumference from the ankle all the way up.
Yeah, you're not a column, like
No,
straight down. Got
not
it.
a column. So I thought, okay, I can use an amazing sock pattern that's toe up, to establish, you know, what the gauge would be if I was going to use the motif and only part of the sweater. And I can keep trying it on because it's toe up. So that's what I did. And then I'm going to use this cuff section to figure out the gauge.
Beautiful.
So I started, I knit all the way up to the ankle, and I used a 3.75 millimeter needle. And then I just kept going up needle sizes all the way until a cast off, which I did at a 6.5 millimeter needle.
Nice. Nice.
In order to kind of, so it looks bell shaped, but the fit is actually quite amazing. Now, the other sort of trial that I did with this was to figure out which way do I want to knit the pattern? Which way do I want to place the pattern? And I was really quite enamored with the bottom section. And so what I've done is, I haven't done very much herringbone. I knit from the chart in one direction. So I knit it in the opposite direction, then top down, and then bottom up, to see, like, can I read this chart upside down, or do you need to read it in the more traditional way from bottom up, right to left? And can my brain do the gymnastics? And what I discovered is that my brain is not very good at doing the gymnastics of reading the chart from top down. So although I really like a top down sweater, I'm starting to think that I might be knitting this sweater bottom up, so that it's an enjoyable process, so that I get to sort of knit along with you guys and think about you guys and all the wonderful ideas that you've given me, but that I'm not like doing a giant, what feels like a tongue twister in my brain,
Yes.
to knit it top down. I say that now.
Well, I do. But I love this because we're so similar. I mean, these are where we are so similar. We've got these like lovely differences between us, but we also are very connected, because I did a similar thing, first of all, with the sleeves, because I started with, oh God, 6 or 7, US 6 or 7. Can't remember. I'll have to look back. I did write it down, thank God. But then as I was getting up, I'm like, this does seem a little tight. And I'm like, well, I don't want to increase. So I increased a needle size halfway up, and like, so you can kind of see that it's gotten bigger, but like the motif didn't have to change. So that does work in terms of, yeah, making that. And then the top down, I did the same thing, Jackie, because I was doing some other like swatches, because I've decided I want to also, in addition to making this one, I'm toying with an idea of like probably a raglan, or maybe like saddle shoulder, but keeping the top part like one color, like my main color, and it'll all be just straight one color. And then once I split for sleeves, then doing the color work just around the bottom. And so then I was like, so what would that be like? And so I literally just flipped the thing upside down. Like I just flipped the pattern like the book. I turned it upside down and I just was like reading it. And it was okay, but you're right. I didn't enjoy it as much. I was thinking if I loved this top down, I feel like there's a way to transcribe this probably if you had some graph paper and like probably make it so that you don't have to do all the gymnastics in your head. Like you could actually do it as you go, but I abandoned that for the moment anyway, because I got impulsively, I joined another test knit, which maybe I'll talk about after, but that I got all into that. But yeah, so I did just quickly about this knit. So this is the same, if you can believe it, because I feel like these look different. Like mine looks greener, I think, or more tealy. But this is Pupaline, so the same as Jackie's sweater. And then Lola, which is a purple, kind of a muted purple. And I did this is all single. So like I don't know if you can see, but that's a lot. It's a very warm sweater. I don't know if you can see. It's substantial, but very enjoyable. Jackie was talking the last podcast about this being a really accessible pattern to start with, like motif to start with for first-time color workers, because you're always using it. So you're not having long, like you don't have sections where you have to start your wool and stop your wool. And also there's not long floats. Like you don't have to go more than, like I didn't have, there was no time at all that I had to catch floats, because you're just constantly using one color. Like maybe you go, it's like 1, 1, 1, 1, maybe you go 3 at a time. I don't think there's anything more than 3 at any given time. So it's just really, Caroline spoke about how she started hers and couldn't put it down. And like, I was just knitting on this. I was taking, like, we were going on trips and I'm in the car, literally just like knitting away, because you learn the pattern very quickly. So you don't have to look at it. And yeah, so I was like, this one was done in probably 2.5 days. And then I got going on this one. And I was like, I'm going to have both of them done by the time we have our podcast. But then I got distracted.
How did you decide on the colors, Carmen?
So I talked last time about Kvatch. I was going to do Kvatch and Lola. I think I had a few. Your sock was another one I was considering, but I was really like, there was something about the Lola with the Kvatch that I really loved, which is kind of a pinky. Oh, actually here, because this is going in my test knit. So hooray. So that was what I was going to do. But then so Lola, when we had our last podcast, I had all of my wools just out on my coffee table as usually. And me being me, that didn't get cleaned up for 3 days, at least. I don't even know. So, but I loved it because I would just keep sitting and I would just watch like these things, and things would fall, piles would fall. And Lola and Pupaline were sitting beside each other. And I was like, I don't know, and when you first look at it, you're like, it's a lot of color, but I love color. And it reminded me of like a mermaid, like peacocky mermaid. I don't know. I loved it. But I will say, actually, and this is an interesting thing, once I get this knit, I'm kind of all over the place, but when I was doing this swatch, so I started with this was my main color, what I thought I was going to be my main color. Well, it is my main color. But when I was picturing this, I actually was picturing the purple being these bits. Like I thought that would be the main color, and like the contrast color would be the lines. And as I was going along, I don't know, like I knit this part, and then as I got into the whole pattern, I just automatically made the purple I guess like the contrast color.
I guess there's a background color and a pattern color, right? So
yes.
you thought that the purple Lola was going to be in the background, but you switched it to be the pattern, the motif, right?
The wool switched it. Who knows who switched it? It just happened, and I didn't notice it. And actually, to the point where I was holding the purple in front. So, when we talk about, I know there's some controversy about dominance, like color dominance, and like where you hold. Yes.
Yeah.
What was it again?
Stitch dominance, I think.
Stitch dominance.
Thank you to the viewer who taught us about that.
Yes. Well, and it was so funny because there was this, lovely comment. I'm like, la, 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 like a few days later doing this. And then I find out, oh my God, I actually haven't, I was holding it the opposite. So this one, I held it correctly, so I put the pupiline was ahead. No, yes, the pupiline, no. Lola, the purple, was ahead in this one.
Because that's the color. So what we're talking about, I guess, stitch dominance is when you're working with two different colors and a pattern motif. There's a certain way to hold the yarn so that the motif pops more.
Or apparently, there's controversy about whether it actually does.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Some people say it isn't. And I don't know. Like, in some ways, I think the purple's more clear here than here, especially at the bottom.
Yeah.
But you never know. Like, we should do, both sides if we're really kind of thinking, is it just the color of the, these are the scientists in us, right? Like we have to be like, well, let's disconfirm our theory. But yeah, anyway, I just thought that was so interesting because we had a comment about it. And this I actually did do. I switched here somewhere, maybe around here. Not quite sure. That was a lot to talk about a sleeve and a half. I went on, but fun. Anyway, super fun. I'm going to do this. I'm next going to do the body. And then I think it should not be very hard. This is what I'm telling myself, to just join them. And I'm going to have a raglan seam, and I'm going to do that in purple. So I'm not worrying about like the pattern. I'm just going to have like a 3 or 4 stitch, maybe even a bit bigger, and just like have that come up. And then I'll just start the pattern wherever it would be. And this is going to be easy and it's going to be fine. That's in the intention.
Here's the thing. If it's not, you can unravel.
Yes. Or find somebody who knows what to do. Like if I have to fly to Sweden, and see Annalie and be like, I know she would help.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of as I was reflecting about our sort of swatching conversation, there are definitely some things that I've knit and I haven't swatched. And, I think if you decide that you're not going to swatch, you must also decide that you are going to happily unravel. And as long as you're like comfortable with both ends of that spectrum, then I think that not swatching is okay. I think that if you're somebody who doesn't relish unraveling, doesn't relish sort of doing things a second time, then I think swatching is what helps you to enjoy your process.
Estimate it. But like Annalie says, these things change all the time, right? Like when you're swatching, you're going to be in like a different mode, right? And then like maybe you're a little bit more like tense. And then when you're into your project, because to be honest, I think I haven't measured it, but I think my gauge is a little bigger on this one than even this one, because I know what I'm doing here. I'm cool, cool and collected with this. Whereas here I'm like, what am I doing? Did I do the right thing? What happened with the colors? That wasn't what I was expecting. So like more stressed. But I don't think I finished my thought as usual. The reason I started on the sleeve and why I went bottom up was actually laziness, because I wanted to do the swatch in the round so that I could get like a good idea of what the gauge is. But the idea of doing that in the round without having a purpose, I was like, I need to have it maybe work out. So here, I think I did 60 stitches. So I was like, well, 60 stitches is okay. Even if it doesn't work out, I can unravel that. That's not too much, but at least it might work out. And then it did. So lazy swatching bottom up sweaters, that is one thing that is an advantage.
I think the other thing is both you and I sort of, when we talked about the sweater, we're both sort of comfortable with this sweater being a sweater that has some ease to it, right? And so I feel like when I think about my sweater knit fails, it's situations in which I didn't swatch, or I swatched in a way that didn't wasn't consistent with the way that I was actually going to knit the sweater. Like I did my swatch flat and it's like this teeny tiny thing. And then I ended up knitting it in the round with, you know, the metal size needle instead of the, the like wind size needle. And then the whole sweater is done and it's like too small. So because I think you and I are okay with, you know, anywhere between 0 to 3 to like 5 inches of positive ease and roominess, then the swatching and the swatching is less critical. Although here's what I want to say about unspun yarn. So both Nutiden and Pocholopi have some give in them. So I did bring some, I do have some yarn. So I'm so excited. This is like a podcaster thing. So you can see, if I hold it really close here, that although it looks, you know, friable, it's actually quite, it's sturdy if I hold it like this. If I hold it like this, you'll see that it starts to, there's some stretch to it. It's starting to draft. It's starting to separate. But there is like this middle spot, right, where it's still together. Oh, it's still together. Oh, now it's not together anymore, right? There is this like flexibility of the yarn so that if, you know, let's say you knit something and you just want to eke out a little bit extra, like, you know, we can't get like inches, but eke out a little bit extra just because there isn't a twist or a ply, there's a little more flexibility. And so that's the other reason why I think when it came to me exploring color work, it's been the things that I've used unspun yarn to do color work that have been the most successful. Because one of the things that can happen or is common in color work is that they often recommend that you use a needle size larger than what would be like typical for you, because there's the tendency for people to be tight in their color work and create puckering. This is the general trend. I'm sure that there are people who are actually looser in their color work. But puckering in color work happens because the floats, you don't allow enough of the yarn that you're not knitting with between when you knit it. This is why we are not going to do tutorials. Anyhow, there's tension issues. Essentially, you can get tension issues. But with unspun yarn, if you have tight floats, if there's a tension issue, there is like a little bit of give. Mm-hmm. And because unspun yarn also has the tendency to felt together, it's non-superwash, right? And particularly with Nutiden, there's usually quite a bit of like lanolin in it. That's going to encourage the fibers to come back together, even if you have to kind of stretch it and your floats become, you know, not entirely structurally sound. It's in that in-between place that if you eked it a little bit further, like goodbye. But yeah, so one of the things that I was hoping to talk about today, or one of the things that I had like written down on the list, was talking about working with Nutiden Single Stranded. So Carmen, how has it been for you to do the color work holding one strand?
Awesome. Now I will say, oh, and it's like a breeze, so hopefully you can hear me. I have worked, this is probably my 5th, 6th project with single strand, maybe 7th. So I have worked with it a bunch. So I think a person was asking me, maybe it was on Instagram, about there's sort of a fear of working with single strand because it can break. It can feel like it's going to break so easily, and it certainly can. But I've had the experience that, like, I think our bodies adjust. Like if you don't think about it too much, you let your hands will become more gentle with the yarn naturally. So the more that you use it, the more you know not to pull, like you just won't pull. And unlike Jackie, actually, I actually use a lot of other, well, maybe not a lot, I'm using a lot of Nutiden lately, but I also do knit with other wools, and I can go back and forth with them, and my brain, my body, my hands know how gentle to be with the Nutiden versus another wool that I can pull a lot harder with. So it's honestly, I didn't have any more breakage, I don't think, with single strand than I would with a double stranded project. And honestly, it doesn't break very often. And when it does, as I say, I literally just pick up. So here, this, like, so you can see this one, because I wasn't careful with it. This is where it's left, right? You're like, oh my God, what do we do, right? So I might, one of two things. Sometimes I'll go back a few stitches and have a little bit longer tail, but I will literally, this is not the right color, but oops. I will actually just kind of overlap it a little bit and leave this little tail and just grab this piece, put them together and just start knitting. So it used to be that I would actually like take them and I would rub them to try and like even use spit to make it like stick together. But I would find that that would be a bit hard because you'd start to get, you know, like it kind of tears as you're trying to put it together. So a lot of times I'm just leaving it now and I just twist it a little with my fingers, keep on knitting, and Nutiden just takes care of the rest of it. So it makes it a lot easier when there is a breakage. It doesn't feel quite as you know, catastrophic.
Yeah. What's your setup? Is this like did you say that you're taking this in the car? You're knitting a color work single stranded on tiny needles in the car?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I can tell you my needles. Yeah, look at that. I could tell you what size I'm using. 7s. So they're not that tiny. But yeah, totally. I just hold it. And yes, sometimes it's slightly more annoying maybe than a yarn that you don't have to worry about, but honestly, not very much. Like it's great. And sometimes I leave it, so you can see, sometimes I leave it in the plate and I just pull from it there. Sometimes, depending on where I'm at and what the plate looks like, sometimes it separates too much. And so I'll roll it into a ball.
Oh, you make little 1-ply balls.
Yeah.
Oh, that's clever.
But only like no consistency. Sometimes this, sometimes that. You never know.
So again, this is how we're totally different because I have a very specific setup if I'm going to work with Nutiden Single Strand, which is arguably my favorite way of working with it, just because I love the airiness in the drape. So here's how I work with it. And, you know, the encouragement here is that you figure out the way that works for you to work with it. But one of the things that I always do if I'm working with Nutiden Single Stranded is that I will choose the plate or the colorway carefully, in the sense that, so I think that if you're an experienced knitter and you're willing to explore, you can use any single colorway of Nutiden Single Stranded if you're willing to explore and if that's a fun process for you, right? But there are because each colorway is composed of a different combination of Swedish breed wools, and because of the process of how Nutiden is made, that literally the humidity of the air as the wool is being made at the mill affects what comes out. Each colorway has kind of different characteristics. So I brought 2 different plates here to try and show you guys that this colorway here is parallel. And if I hold it up to the screen, hopefully you guys can see that. You can see that, you know, it's quite fluffy and it's quite lofty, and there's it feels to me less daunting to work with this kind of thing single stranded because it just seems less fragile. And so what I would do is I would, you know, pull out the colorways and I would run it through my fingers and sort of see what it's like. And then I would also do this little test where, exactly as I showed, you're gonna see how much give do I have? Oh, okay. How much give do I have? So I know for this particular strand that I have to hold the yarn, and I'm a continental knitter. I have to hold the yarn relatively, how close or how far do I need to hold the yarn in my hand? And So I'm going to come around to my setup. My setup is basically that whether I'm working with a plate, because I've never done those single ply balls, although now I want to try, is that I am putting the plate in a place where that is close. Because if I put the plate on the floor, or if I put it, in a basket, like, far away from me, every single time I try and sort of, when I need more yarn, when I'm knitting, it's going to break. And if it breaks, cool, just overlap and keep going. But it helps me with breakage to kind of choose something that I think is going to make it a process where I'm not having to like manage so often. And to set myself up, and like when I find myself in my knitting chair and I'm like setting up with like my tea and all my things, that I'm like, where am I going to put my plate, that I'm not going to have to worry about that breakage. And honestly, often I'll like unwind a couple. I'll kind of do this and I'll lay it out like that, and then sort of slowly work away of it, so I'm not creating extra tension on the yarn where I don't need to. And it's actually a really good thing for me, because sometimes I'll start knitting and you just can't stop. And so this process allows me to be more mindful about it. And sometimes I'm like, okay, so I'm going to pull out a bunch. And once I reach the end of the stuff that I've already kind of pulled out, take a sip of water, like stretch your hands, maybe get up. Do I have to go to the bathroom? Do I have to care for my needs? It's like these little pauses that start to show up in our knitting practice, particularly if, like me, you get very enthusiastic about things and find it really hard to put things down if you really love it.
Love it. Beautiful. Yeah. So both work, right? So I think that ultimately, like your setup, that would be the ideal. And I think if somebody's thinking that they want to start, with trying single strand, that I would recommend probably starting Jackie's route, then car knitting with things falling all over the place. But whatever feels right is obviously the right thing for everybody. But yeah, it would be a lot easier, I think, to start with having it be right there for you and not change too much. And the one thing is, you do want to try to minimize breakage, because while it's super easy, you are actually making your strand a little thicker each time it's broken, because it's for that stitch or the next few stitches, it'll be kind of like you're holding it double, right? Because you've got two. So if you're breaking a lot, then you're going to end up with actually a project that is much thicker than you were planning. It's not really going to feel very single strand, like if you've actually been fixing it so often that it's going to be like that it's actually more like double. But I did want to say, and I don't know, you've got an opinion there.
No, go, you go.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, remember yours, because I might forget mine, and so I'll go. I did want to say, and Jackie, you can speak probably better to this because you've been a Nutiden patron for longer, but I'm finding that the plates that we're getting now tend to be a lot more stable, even than the ones when I started, like, I think it was like in the springtime last year. That's when I first started, and they felt a lot thinner and a lot like more friable then. Whereas now it's pretty consistent, that I'm feeling like I'm not really coming into colorways that I feel like I'm like, oh, definitely not this one for single. Whereas some earlier ones were like that.
So both Carmen and I are Patreons of Nutiden. Carolyn produces, has a Patreon, and as part of being a Patreon, you are supporting their mill and their work. And what comes out of that is sort of a weekly podcast episode that's like an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, in which you get a little bit of sort of behind the scenes around the yarn, but a lot about sort of Carolyn's creative process. And so a lot of the stuff that we share about Nutiden here, we receive through that Patreon podcast, in which she sort of talks about her process. And I remember that she had mentioned that they had sort of changed things at the mill, like they changed a part of the machine that made it such that they are using either more or less water in the process of making the yarn, so that the yarn is coming out like a little bit thicker and fluffier. So I did bring 2 examples. So hold these up together. So you can see that there's a difference. And you can see that if I were to pull, they have different breaking points. And so interesting as I watch that actually, because the one that seems a little bit skinnier, and that I'm like looking at being like, can I do this in single strand? That it actually has more, what would the word be? Flexibility, right? It is more forgiving, perhaps, let's say, to, the tugs that sometimes happen. So
Yep.
yeah.
I wonder if we could talk, maybe just because like that segue, just talking a little bit more about Caroline and the podcast and being a patron. Like I was, maybe you could talk a bit about that, like, or we could kind of give our thoughts on.
Yeah. So maybe I'll share sort of like my story with Nutiden, right? So I started working with Nutiden like pretty close to the beginning of when Carolyn and Canute started producing their own wool from the whole process. I had tried to knit with other yarns, didn't really click. Then I was able to use Plotulopi, and I was like, I really enjoy the feeling of this unspun, and so I was working with Plotulopi, but found for me that Plotulopi was really great for sweaters and things that I could wear not next to skin, but I was really hoping to explore something that I felt comfortable wearing next to skin. And Plotulopi is like a 50-50, whether or not on that particular day I feel like it's comfortable next to skin or not. And so somehow I just saw a picture of of the first collection of Nutiden Yarn, and found out at that time, Carolyn had already sort of started a podcast, which was accessible through her Patreon. And it was very, very affordable. It was like $6 or $6 a month. And I was just really interested to kind of learn about the yarn and understand how this was the same or different from Plotulopi, because I had sent her a message and sort of said, I'm new to unspun yarn. Is this like Plotulopi? Like, tell me about it. And she sort of said, she was really generous and told me all about it. And she was like, if you're interested, like, we just started, so we're learning all about this. And I've got a podcast in which I'm going to share that process. And so, for me, the creative process, if you guys haven't figured this out yet, is like the story behind the yarn and how things come to be, is a deep, deep fascination of mine. And so I became a Patreon of Carolyn's because I was interested in the process of how wool gets made. As someone who was fairly new to unspun, like that was my curiosity. And then, of course, starting to work with the wool, that sort of happened in tandem, and how much I love the process of working with the wool. But I have to say that the ability to see how things are evolving behind the scenes, right? To get to learn about the fact that the yarn, began unwashed, essentially. Like, at the beginning, it was like they were washing it in the river behind their house, right? That's not how they're doing it now, but the understanding that that was happening, and that they were working with sort of natural pigments, like no spin oil, like there was just nothing added at that time. It was like, it wasn't plant-based dye, but it was like natural pigments, and getting to see those pigments go into the water in a vat over like a wood fire, and to see it go from, river and fire and, rainwater into the mill to become these plates. That's really what added to the love of Nutiden, is being able to really be a part of understanding the story of how, this comes to arrive, in the mail on my doorstep, and then being really fascinated through the sort of Patreon community of being able to see what people were making with it, and how, what started in the vat becomes this, and then becomes hats, mitts, gloves, a cardigan, that has been my favorite part of being a part of that community.
Love that.
What about you?
Oh, I love, yes, I couldn't agree more. I do. We love actually, Jackie and I, the podcast comes every week and it's an absolute just like delight. Like we wait for it. And then, it's a thing. Like even for me, like I might take my wool in the car and go everywhere. But when it comes to the podcast, like, no, I gotta sit down. I want to have my team. I'm knitting along and the colors, you might see the colors or get a sneak peek or something like this. But once you understand the reason, like what the colors, what they are, how Caroline chose this, how she decided on this particular like colorway, and then the names of it, like everything has meaning to it. And it just expands the enjoyment. And I was saying to Caroline the other day, like, it reminds me, my father is an English professor. And so I would read, I remember in school, like in high school, he'd sometimes give guest lectures, and, we'd all read the poem and we're like, okay, like good poem, cool, right? And then Dad would like go through word by word what this poem meant, why it was these words, what all the meaning is behind it. And suddenly this poem was the most amazing thing ever, like, so once you have the understanding, it actually, I think, increases the enjoyment of what you've got, of the art that you're using. So the podcast is amazing. I also just wanted to say as well that while it's a podcast about wool, there are actually people, I found out from Caroline, there are people that are patrons. They come for the podcast and they're not even knitters. It's not even about the wool, because Caroline shares so much of herself and the ways of seeing the world. And I always find myself thinking about things differently. Jackie and I are both therapists, and I know we both have used some of the examples she talks about and some of the ways she sees things with our clients to really explore or like explain certain things. And, I would kind of see it as like thinking outside of the box. Like Caroline doesn't take anything as just like, this is the way it is. She's always thinking about stuff, and you can just take so much from it. So any opportunity to be part of the patron, and as Jackie said, like I'm pretty sure the minimum level is still like $6 like, and you can kind of pay whatever works for you. Yeah. And I do think that there is talk of maybe some spots opening up soon. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So the Patreon, Carolyn keeps at a particular size because her intention around the Patreon is that the Patreon is a bit of a community, right? In the sense that she wants to be able to make sure that the people who support her through the Patreon also are able to like have conversations with her in terms of like, if somebody makes a comment, that she can kind of reply to that. And so she's kept it at a particular size so that she can continue to foster and create that community. But it sounds like we've heard that the Patreon may not be for everybody, and people sort of come and go from it. And so they're at sort of times in which there becomes space inside of the Patreon, which you would subscribe sort of like month to month. Carolyn opens it up, and it's typically announced through the social media channels like her Instagram, which we'll link below, that happens. And what I love about it is that you can decide to join the community for a month, and you get like 4 episodes and an opportunity to kind of see what it's about. Because for me, it's, of course, as part of the process of being a Patreon, she'll show the colorways, which you guys can see on Instagram as the shop updates are coming. But it's a lot about the creative process of like how she's come to create the yarns and some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur and a small business owner, and just her journey. And that's really what moves me about working with this yarn, other than the fact that I love the process, is I'm feeling like a part of something. And so, whether you're a patron or not, I think one of the things that's been so beautiful about this podcast and beautiful about like knitting in general and the community that arises around it, that is that like sense of being a part of something like greater that I think is, my therapist brain says like this is a fundamental human need that we want to connect with others and that we want to feel a sense of belonging and that we want to have connection. And so when I knit with the wool, now I am also contemplating about, my connection with Carmen and the friendship that we have over it and the connections that we have with you and, um, how that makes me feel. And that's really why I knit, is because knitting gives me a sense of place and a sense of belonging and a sense of creativity. And the Patreon is part of that. I hope that this podcast offers people an opportunity. Like, really, the reason why we did this is because we were inspired by Carolyn's podcast and the stories of the yarn and each other's stories. And so,
I love that. I love that. And probably also would be great to mention too that so the being part of the patron is amazing. Like, it's wonderful. And I actually want to say that I joined it. I just happened to go on Patreon and there was a spot open. So like Caroline has times where she opens it up, like, she'll add a certain number of spots that'll be available, but you can also just like kind of check out, because some people will just leave, right? Like, they might just come just for a shop update and then maybe there's a spot open. And I think in some ways, like, maybe that's like, for me, I was like, I just feel like that I was meant to join at that time, like, and so that's another route. But we do want to say that it's also not necessary, like, and there was, I think there was a time where it was kind of hard to get Nutiden, and I mean, being a patron was helpful because you get access, like there's most updates go to the patrons first and then there's a public update after, but now they just, as they're growing in terms of their abilities to make yarn, they're making a lot more yarn, so it's actually a lot more accessible than it might feel like it is. So you don't actually have to be a patron to get the wool. So that's just like an additional thing. But if you just want to try it, you can go on the public update. There's probably most likely going to be, the wool that you're meant to have. The wool will be waiting there for you, and you can give it a shot. So don't feel like it's like you have to be part of this group, and the only way to get this would be if you were part of the Patreon, because that's not actually the case, and it's a lot easier to get than it might have been in the past.
Yeah, there were definitely times, because I've been around for, I think, almost about 2 years, maybe a little bit over that. There were times where being a patron, there was no sort of early shopping if you were a patron. That has come and gone over the years. I don't know if it's, and Carolyn has talked about it not being a consistent thing, right? That sometimes there's early access as a Patreon and sometimes there isn't. Like, even in the past year, there are some collections that there's only been the public update, and there are some collections in which there's a Patreon update that comes kind of prior to that. So the other thing that I want to say is that I, like Carmen, would fall in love with the stories. So like, one of my favorite things about being a Patreon is being able to understand the story behind this colorway, like what was the inspiration and what was going on and what's inside of this colorway. And then I found myself with colorways in my stash that really didn't suit me, didn't suit sort of the colors that I like to wear or the energies that I like to embody, because I had fallen in love with the story behind the wool and ended up with wool that, if I didn't know the story, I never would have picked. So coming full circle around that, and me wanting to really allow the craft to be an honoring of like who I am and what I love, I've started watching the episodes still mindfully, right? Still with a little bit of like ritual around it, and the post episode ritual of talking to Carmen, what did you think? And like, what do you love? But I actually started watching them on mute and like scrolling through when there are episodes that are showing the new colors, I'd watch it on mute and I'd kind of like scroll through to see the color and then have my own experience of like whether or not I thought that it was something that I felt drawn to or felt like I desired or was attracted to. And that has led to, I mean, my stash is still wild. But that's been a really interesting thing for me to explore in terms of my own creative expression, which is like, why do we knit? And like, why do we choose to knit what we knit? And my process is really contemplative and, you know, hopefully we'll be able to share that in future episodes. And Carmen, yours is similarly contemplative, but your contemplations are kind of, they happen at a different time. You just have this like beautiful instinct and you start knitting, and it's like as you start knitting that you get to know the connection that you have with like color and pattern and process. And then sometimes you toss things and then try it again, which so
and I would say actually that funny enough, like probably with every color selection, if I'm doing color work or even, I mean, with tall bark and everything, I always have a moment where I'm like, is this even good? Like, and I question it. Like this one, I mean, Jackie, I sent you a thing when I'd gone, I think I'd gotten to here and I'm like, I don't know if the contrast is strong enough. And then Jackie, this is why, you know, you need a knitting bestie, because she's like, well, what if you just keep going? Like maybe you need a little more herringbone. And I'm like, yeah, that seems reasonable. Maybe I should just try a little longer. And then I was like, oh, I'm in love. But most things I do, I like, so I trust the experience, but then I will have these moments of like self-doubt of like, oh my God, I don't know, like maybe it's not what I want, you know, but overarching everything is my trust that it's all meant to be and it will be exactly as it's supposed to. And like even these colorways that you're saying, you know, like that it might not be the colors you want, like you're still meant to have them, like they're gonna end up somewhere. They might not even be yours. Like maybe you give them away or whatever it is, but like you were meant to have them, I think. And some we just weren't meant to have and other people are supposed to. So it just works itself.
I think because the way that the yarn is produced, like there's so much intentionality and there's so much nature in it. For me, Nutiden is more the way that I experience Nutiden is that I feel like every single colorway carries like an energy. It has its own little personality. And so when I'm knitting with the yarn, you know, sometimes I'm choosing to cast on a project because there's a sense that that particular colorway and the intention that went behind how it was made is something that I'm really wanting to explore and cultivate in my life, right? And so I think that there is a certain, for me, magic about the yarn in that, yes, it's about the colors and yes, it's about, you know, beautiful finished objects, but it also is this process of getting to know oneself and using the craft as a way to expand our edges, right? Knitting things that we maybe are uncertain about or uncomfortable about. It certainly helps to have a wonderful community that is like supportive and that will help give you support along the way if you're not sure about things. But yeah.
Love it. So remember, Jackie, when you were like, so what, another like 15, like we'll make this one a short episode, like 15 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
We talk a lot. I will, and I love it. I love it. I will say, getting back to our episode 1 point or /0.75, like one thing I think we haven't shown much today was more like knitting, like, which I just want you to know we will show lots of that moving forward. I almost feel I'm like, was there anything you wanted to just show quickly, Jackie, just to like give some
knitting content, actual knitting
content?
Do you want to talk about the giveaway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this was always our plan to eventually do, to share our stash with you, because Carmen and I have had so much fun sharing our stash with each other. We were like, we'll do it episode 5, but because we were so like overwhelmed by the love that we receive from you guys after one episode, we were just like, we're going to do it now. So what we're what we're going to do is we've decided to give away little parts of our stash. And the intention here is that it will give some of you the opportunity perhaps to participate in the Inspired by Ellen knit-along, or to even try the wool. But what we thought we would do is give away a couple sets of like an accessory, I guess an accessory sized amount of wool in 2 different colors, much like our last episode, which was all about sort of color play and those kinds of things. So in order to participate in the giveaway, what we're going to ask you to do is to leave a comment below this episode and let us know, what accessory would you like to knit? And what feeling, what color, what quality are you wanting to have more of in your life? And what Carmen and I are going to do when she gets back from the UK is we are going to pull out our stash and we're going to pick a couple of winners and put together a little combination of wool, 2 different colors, maybe 3, who knows, on the basis of what it is that you share. And we'll send that along to you probably at the beginning of the fall. And maybe that little mini becomes something that you use to make a sock for the KAL, or just whatever strikes your fancy, or it just goes somewhere in your home to remind you of sort of inspiration and community. However you want to use it, it's completely up to you. But maybe in terms of showing knitting and talking about—
Can I add before we do that?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, because of course I'm just thinking on the fly. So we're both going to give, we're going to give from our stashes, right? And I think we had talked about like almost trying to guess at the energy from the people, like, so whoever, I'm assuming we're going to do some kind of random selection, right?
Yeah.
But then
Yes.
in your response, we want to kind of guess or feel like your soul's talking to our souls, so that we can like get something that we feel would be what you would want, like, or that like, or maybe would take you out your comfort zone or whatever. So I'm just thinking in your description, like giving, like, don't you know, I really love like reds and blues, like probably not like that kind of level, but like maybe, you know, I'm really, you know, if you're drawn to Jackie, you know, like Jackie's kind of energy, and we know that she loves, you know, neutrals and things like a little bit more, or Carmen's like energy, like, what are you gonna get? It could be anything, you know, but like maybe putting something like that in there. And it's not like it's going to influence whether you win or not. And if you don't do it, that's fine. But it would just maybe give us a sense of like, when we pull it, we could be like, oh, okay, I think this person should have something from my stash, or, you know, this person I feel like, you know, would be Jackie, or maybe it's the person would have a combo, so that we're almost trying to figure something out within that's going to be tailored to you in whatever way that we can do that with our stashes and abilities.
So how about we do this? Edit, rewind. We're not going to edit.
Edit as if we know how to do that.
If you would like to participate in the giveaway, leave a comment below and let us know what feeling, what mood, or what emotion you're hoping to call into your life. And Carmen and I will have so much fun putting together some color combinations that, in our experience, we feel embodies that quality. Send it over to you with 0 expectations and 0 attachment, but for you to then have the experience of saying, like, what is Nutiden saying to me? What does this color combination say to me? And does this want to become a hat or mittens or socks? Because I did bring with me a number of things that you can knit with 50 grams. So that's a half plate. You can knit a pair of mittens. Cute. So these are, I'm going to put them on. These are the KEala mittens, which is a mitten recipe that was written by Anna Lee, who's Miss Evil Knits, who has recently started a blog in which she is publishing sort of not her patterns, but recipes. So when I say recipe, she has a bunch of videos in which she step by step shows you how she made that particular thing. So how she, in this case, it's mittens. And there isn't a pattern. There's nothing written down, but she really teaches about construction and how you come to create things that fit you. So these are the best fitting mittens in the world, in my opinion, of the things that I have knit. And this, oh, I wrote it down. This was held double stranded. I do have fairly small hands, but this one mitten with a little bit of color work on it, 30 grams. So you could make a mitten. You could make a hat. This is also 40 grams. This is the minted hat by Andrew Mowry. I knit this in Nutiden, double stranded with the colorway marker. This was, going back, this was, the main color was Inferno, the red with a little bit of dandelion, and the white is snow. This sock, double stranded with, you know, color work, 40 grams, size 7 sock. So if you're wanting to try Nutiden and you're not sure about it, I really encourage you to start with an accessory. And that way you're not committed to a giant project. And that was also some of the spirit behind the giveaway, which is going to go on until our next episode, which is likely to be late August when Carmen's back.
Yes.
Did I say everything that needs to be said about giveaways, having never done giveaways before?
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure we're such pros.
All right, Carmen, any last thoughts, any last things that you want to show?
Because guess what? I wrote a list.
You wrote a list.
I did. We like switched or something, but I'm just gonna see. Oh, I didn't talk. Okay, next time I'll talk about my first Nutiden experience. That was something I was gonna talk about and just like how that all went. Yeah, well, this will be good because then we'll talk about that and be giving away this to somebody else to have their first experience, or maybe if you're a pro, you still get to be part of the giveaway too. So that's also good.
All is welcome wherever you are in the world. Just leave a comment and we will randomly select a couple of winners.
Yes. So glad I did. So glad I wrote this. There's a reason you make lists, Jackie. I get it now. Okay. We did want to mention with Anna Lee from Miss Evil Knits that she is also in this blog, which she's about to publish soon. She has created a top-down option with the motif for people. So that's going to be, so it's, I think, I don't know yet, but I think it's like a round yoke. Yeah, so top down with this motif. So if you are like, oh my God, I do want to do a sweater, but I'm like not into the bottom up, this will be something. So she's publishing it soon. So just keep an eye out on her Instagram and also on ours. When we hear more about it, we will be talking about that as well. She's amazing.
Lots
and
of
by
options.
the way, I did want to say with the mitt, like these are recipes, but she does like I was able to do all these things, even at like not knowing much, like really being kind of scared and wanting to follow all the patterns. She takes you through it in like specifically. So it's yeah, but it absolutely is made so that it perfectly fits your hand. Like it's perfect. Totally worth that.
These are my favorite. These are my favorite mittens.
Oh,
they're the first pair of mittens that I ever knit, and I feel like because it wasn't a pattern that sort of said, okay, do your gauge swatch and like all those kinds of things, and because there was video tutorials all along, I was able to make a custom fit glove.
Perfect. Actually, my first Vila mittens were stolen by my mother, who I had brought to her house. I'd left them on the table, and then I guess she picked them up and was wearing. And she's like, "What are these? Like, what are these?" And I was like, "Keep them. I'll make another," because it was only takes like a day. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that, I think we got everything. We were going to show more knits, but 2 hours.
As it happens. So next podcast, we promise we'll be back together, and we will have a better camera setup in terms of being able to show you colors and stuff like that. And so many more knits for the next episode. If you're still here with us, thank you for sharing your time with us. We hope that you in some way are inspired. We hope that this has given you an opportunity to think about how knitting can be something that you love, something that gives you an opportunity to creatively express yourself, to get to know yourself, and to also get to connect with other people. And show notes, where you can find us, all that kind of stuff is going to be down in the description box. And I personally can't wait to hear and be inspired by all the various things that you are inspired by, that you're wanting to kind of call in to your life, and hope that the comment section will become a source of inspiration for all of you.
Me
Until
too.
next time.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.